minutes left, okay. Proverbs 25. The 6th verse. I want to start with tonight, the 6th verse. Be not, I'm reading from the Amplified Translation. Be not forward or self-assertive and boastfully ambitious in the presence of the king, and stand not in the place of great men. The writer of Proverbs in this particular verse is speaking about a self-assertive spirit. There's a book written some time ago by a Christian pastor in Portland, Oregon. In fact, we had him speak in our ministry, and he wrote a book on being self-assertive. To be self-assertive certainly has its proper place in certain situations. But this book dealt with the necessity of being self-assertive. I suppose it was speaking of people who were very passive and filled with apathy. But this says, do not be self-assertive with boastfulness in the presence of the king, and stand not in the place of great men. The verse that's really, the meaning behind this verse literally deals with the subject of respect, honor, and authority. And it's dealing with those men that God has raised up with a certain office. And as never before, you think of this country, we thank God for the freedom of the two-party system. Sometimes you wonder if it's really two parties anymore. But it is, because we have a Republican president. But the two-party system has certainly been a great blessing to all people. But by the same token, and by the same manner, we have this great principle where America has lost all respect and all admiration and honor and dignity for the office of presidency or for any high official office. And people are so boastful and self-assertive against them without knowing both sides of an issue. So this verse covers that. This country has been going downhill now for years in losing all manner of respect because of often political prejudice or because of certain issues that have developed and increased with great animosity. So you don't have to listen to many talk shows to hear that. For example, what do you personally think of Vice President Quayle? See, what's your first automatic response when we mention his name? Pastor Jim, what's your response? Be honest now.
Well, I don't know. I think he's a very experienced man who has worked hard, he has integrity.
So you want to quickly come down here and say, who else would like? Susan, you get ready and come down. I want to ask you a couple of questions. And Dick, 3 of you right in a row. Use this microphone. Our question for the folks that take audio video is, what do you think of Vice President Quayle?
Well, he's very educated. He's a loyal man, and he's very self-effacing. And basically, he's just the scapegoat for the press to have something humorous to comment about the administration, I think.
How do you think he covered his debate in the election?
Oh, the one where they talked about, you're no Jack Kennedy, that thing?
Well, anything in the debate. Do you appreciate that debate?
I don't remember it that well, too.
I'll tell you frankly, I thought, as much as I loved President Reagan when he ran against Mondale beat him terribly in the debate, but he still won the election. So,
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, President Reagan went spacey at times in the debate. I just sit there praying for him. I said, this can't be my president. Thank you. Susan? Give us an objective view of what you think of Quayle.
I believe, to the best of my knowledge, I don't have much knowledge about politics, but I believe that he's a man of integrity and honesty and is doing the best that he can to back up the president.
Let me ask you this. Why would the president ever choose him? He certainly wasn't the most qualified man. He was. No, come on. You're a smart girl. Share with us. Why did President Bush ever choose him? I mean, I'm not running him down, but why was he chosen?
I don't know.
Thank you. Dick?
The world walks by sight. And I want to tell you, he's blonde-eyed, blue hair. He's got blonde eyes.
I know what you mean.
He's got blonde eyes and blue hair.
Most of these students would never know the difference.
I get my...
Jackie, she wouldn't know the difference.
Sometimes I get my mix all talked up, or I forget my tongue untangled. But listen, I think that the reason that they picked him is because he has, he's got that nice American look. He's got blonde hair, blue eyes, and he's, he has a good image because that's what the world goes for. They go by sight. That's all I have to say. I don't think.
How did he do in college?
No,
I know that. I was wondering. What? No, I'm glad you participated. Thanks.
We'll just have to wait and see, that's all.
Wait, before you go, very quickly. See, we're dealing with kings and leaders here, right? And that's the only reason I'm doing this. I'm drawing us out so that we go beyond the letter and stimulate our thought process in reflection of some type of observation. What do you think of Gorbachev?
We talked about this before, Pastor. I don't think Satan's ever going to repent. They say peace, and there is no peace. Let God be true and every man a liar. I said that years ago. I don't know. I agree with you. What you said that time.
A little piece here and a little piece there. You still think?
You can't trust Satan.
Do you like Vice President Quayle? Be honest. If you don't like him, say so.
I feel that a big part of it is going on what Dick was saying. It was just an image kind of thing. It was one thing. It was also to balance out that Mondale and the older gentleman, Benson from Texas, so they had to have a spring-fall counter. You see what I'm saying? They had a young man and an older man running on the Republican ticket, so therefore they had to have an older man, young man running on the Democratic ticket.
He had to be handsome.
Well, did you think that he handled himself well when he was asked what he would do in case of war or emergency? Do you think he gave a real intelligent answer for that during the debate?
To tell you the truth, Pastor, I have to say too that, let me just say this, he didn't make a real strong impression on me in one way or another during the debate. I don't remember.
He made a good impression? He didn't make a... of course, debates are, for some unknown reason, some people just can't do well in debates even when they're good men. Also, it's much different for the incumbent during a debate, because I mean you've got a record to defend, right? Just very quickly before we pass over this, does Crystal, do you have an opinion on Vice President Quayle?
No, but I did on Gorbachev.
Yeah, let me hear it, Crystal. Yeah. Let's hear your convictions on him.
We were discussing this last weekend. The whole thing with West Germany and East Germany opening up and stuff is, and Gorbachev making peace with Reagan. If you think about it, not everybody's accepting communism, and people know that communism isn't going to work. So if you think that this country, most people think communist is going to be the one ruling government in the end times, but not everybody's accepting it, and it's not working. So we're seeing a decline in communism and a breaking down so that the new government can come in and take over.
What new government?
The one world government where the Antichrist will be the head. I mean, that's my opinion.
Yeah, that's good. Do you think the economic difficulties that have plagued the communist countries, the oppression, and maybe that they were just getting ready to rebel and they weren't going to take any more of it, do you think that had something to do with it?
Oh yeah, well I heard that the reason why they opened up is because they can't afford to support the people and economically.
Well,
I mean,
what do you think? Why do you think they're still assisting Castro in the Philippines and Nicaragua and El Salvador and possibly feeding Guatemala as well? Why do you think that they're still doing that in Central America?
I think that they just don't want to die. I mean, if you...
Why isn't he consistent in Central America with his policy in Western Europe?
Because he can get into America easier if he was in South America. I mean,
you feel he still wants some strongholds, that he's going to be diplomatic and ambiguous in his language as he says, I differ with Castro. Do you think he really does differ with Castro? And if so, why is he absolutely supporting these countries with Castro as it is proven that he is?
I think that a long time ago we talked about this, saying that they're taking over a lot of South American countries because it's an easy access to America, and he sees America as being prosperous, and of course he wouldn't mind getting a hold on our country. And I think that there's a lot of lying that goes on where all over the place, but that's why he probably would say that he's against Castro but then side with him, because...
You'd say then perhaps we could summarize it in part by saying, number one, he will get foreign aid from this country. Number two, maybe this will lead eventually to the disarmament of NATO. Number three, he can still have a strong base in Central America through a little bit of deception and ambiguous political diplomacy. And would you say maybe that, I mean, if he gets foreign aid from America, maybe ultimately the disarmament of NATO, and is still strong in Central America, and economic help for a people that are crying out and have tremendous need, maybe these would be very good reasons, wouldn't they? Yeah. Right, thank you. What? Yes. Now, self-assertive and boastfully ambitious in the presence of the king, and stand not in the place of great men. Verse 7. Perhaps before we leave that, I do want to mention a couple of boys in Mark 10, a couple of brothers. You have to say that the mother wanted them to stand in the presence of a great man. And James and John, the son of Zebedee, Mark 10:35, approached him and said to him, Teacher, we desire you to do for us whatever we ask of you. Now you have a question that you could ask yourselves. What do you think they were doing, and do you think that was okay? And in one way, were they being positively adventurous, or were they being absolutely ambitious in a selfish way? And he replied to them, what do you desire me to do for you? And they said to him, grant that we may sit, one at your right hand and one at your left hand, in your glory, your majesty, and splendor. And Jesus said to them, you do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink? I'll be baptized with the baptism of affliction, which I am baptized. And they said, we are able. And Jesus said, the cup I drink, you will drink, and the baptism of that I'm baptized with, you will be baptized with. Now, I don't think there's enough revelation there to reveal God's attitude toward them, do you? Do you think the Lord was feeling that they were presuming? He said, you don't know what you ask, but I mean, he really... Would you think that perhaps he rebuked them or not? If you think he was in a good way rebuking them, raise your hands. If you don't think he was rebuking them, raise your hands. If you have no idea, all right. Well, the truth is, the solemn truth is this, that in all honesty, it appears he was rebuking them because of his question. It wasn't for him to decide who would be seated at the right and left hand. And furthermore, with all the millions and billions of people in the world and all the millions of Christians, to ask to be... I mean, do you think that was a noble request, or do you think when you consider Jesus taught in this same gospel that the last shall be first and the least shall be promoted in the top position? Was that really being the last and the least, that request? What? Now, I definitely think there was something wrong with that request. I mean, you picture, there's 12 of us following Jesus, and I get him aside, and I said, I've been waiting to ask you this. And I kind of feel funny, but could I and my brother, not only me, but my brother also, could we, right and left hand? No, it's, something's wrong with that. And very wrong with that. I think something was wrong with the mother's attitude, the mother's heart, but we will bypass that for now and be satisfied with some principles of thought. Verse 7, for better it is that it be said to you, come up here. In other words, in the statement we just made, it would have been much better if they would allow Jesus to decide that you should be put in, Lord, in the presence of the prince whose eyes have seen you. Rush not forth soon to quarrel before magistrates or elsewhere, lest you know not what to do in the end when your neighbor has put you to shame. In other words, I guess we would go to the New Testament for this commentary and decide 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Unless you're forced to, unless you have to, do not go to a judicial court system. Allow the church to decide who's right and who's wrong. Unfortunately, today, there aren't many churches that are even qualified to do that. Some are, but not too many are. And people go off to court. I don't know of how many people go off to court, but if you don't have somebody to hear the dispute and someone spiritual to make the decision, then maybe it would be, in some cases, right to go to court in the will of God, as long as there isn't a selfish attitude involved in that transaction. But here it is, 1 Corinthians 6, you're going to judge angels, so don't be so quick and hasty to go to court. Now, verse 9, argue your cause with your neighbor himself. Discover not, and disclose not another's secret. Now, that's a very excellent verse, because it's dealing with the doctrine of privacy. Now, if you know the doctrine of privacy, raise your hands. If you know the doctrine of privacy, raise your hands. And come right down. Let's see you give the doctrine of privacy as it's been taught in the scriptures here in our well, I don't know when, but certainly. Would you come down to the microphone? There's two of you that raise your hand. The doctrine of privacy. Come on down. Come on, Nancy. You put your hand up. No? Okay.
Sorry, I don't know the scriptures where they're at, but doctrine of privacy is how I would place it would be God's honor on the believer, priests themselves, and that the believer priest stands and falls before God and God alone, and because God has a plan, eternal plan in each believer, He is establishing them, and no other believer has that right to put their hand on another believer and what God is doing, and therefore they don't have the right to judge the believer. And that's a very much a part, I believe, that why we have to honor one another's privacy. It's all before God.
Anyone want to try some scriptures on that very quickly?
Romans 14:4.
Romans 14:4. Who art thou that judgeth another man's servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Doctrine of privacy, and stand he will. What's the next verse? 1 Thessalonians 4:11. And what does it say? Study to be quiet and do your own business. Next. What? Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong to God. Next. John 21:22. Jesus speaking to Peter pertaining to John. And he said, what is that to thee? What will happen to John? Follow thou me. Another verse in the doctrine of privacy. All right, can you give another one? 1 Timothy 5:14. What a woman should do. Roger? Against thee and thee only have I sinned. Psalm 51:4. Doctrine of privacy. Proverbs 17:9. Love covers a multitude of sins. But people that aren't right with God repeat the matter, separating even friends. Doctrine of privacy. Now, Matthew 18:15. If a brother sins, go to him all alone. And Galatians 6:1. Doctrine of privacy. Now, a certain speaker out in California, a famous speaker, and they sell some of his books in the bookstore. He absolutely says there is no such thing as the doctrine of privacy. Do you agree with him? No. Let's try another one. One that's familiar with you when you're reminded. Jeremiah 50 verse 20. When they hunt for Israel's sins and Judah's sins, they will not find them. Isn't that doctrine of privacy? All right, your life is hid with Christ in God. And if your life is hid with Christ in God, that's the doctrine of privacy. Does that mean that the table of organization cannot deal with sins in an organization? No, it does not. They can. Does that mean if I break a law that I'm supposed to be covered if I rob a bank or commit some terrible sin? No. That's a judicial violation. We are dealing with other kind of sins, aren't we? So there are many, many things that once confessed and forsaken that enter into what? Say it. Doctrine of privacy. All right, now that you have that straight, we will move on. I want you to remember the doctrine of privacy because the average pastor doesn't honor it. The average missionary doesn't honor it. We've had violations of the doctrine of privacy in the last 2 weeks right in this body, several of them. With people that know better. They misquote you, and they quote you on the basis of their own interpretation of what they wish you were saying. And they manipulate you into saying something that you have no idea that you're saying the way they want you to. But they twist the application, and they twist it and repeat it to use your name to strengthen what they want you to think or believe. So the doctrine of privacy is very vital. Don't take it for granted, please, and do not forget it. All right. Now, don't disclose another's secret. Have anybody ever told you something and you shared it with someone else? And they asked you not to? I would imagine that in my lifetime, hundreds of times I've said dogmatically, what I'm going to tell you now is confidential. And this is this little face will look me in the eye and say, I wouldn't tell anybody. Well, I've learned, don't say it if you don't want it to be repeated. Now, 6 months later, they repeat it, and they get people into all kinds of trouble because they don't repeat the correct interpretation. They misquote you, and most of all, they misquote your heart. Who can read your heart? God looks upon the heart. They misquote your heart and privately interpret the substance. And you say, I told you to keep that confidential. And they will say, I forgot that you said that. Is that correct? Oh boy. Usually in a ministry, and we'll move on in just a minute, we don't have it here. Not to my knowledge, we don't. To my knowledge, we don't have it here. In past ministries, we've had one highly exalted woman who wasn't spiritual. And women would go to that woman who sometimes were hyper-spiritual, sometimes was spiritual, and many times was carnal. And they would run right to her and tell all their secrets. And their secrets were private interpretations, misapplication of hearts, misapplications of truth. Then when she, later on, used that against the whole ministry. There better not be any woman in this ministry, or man either, that you tell secrets of the ministry to. You don't have that right. That is wrong. Because that's violating the doctrine of confidentiality, the doctrine of privacy. That's disclosing a person's secrets. It ought to be quite an honor. Don't you think it should be quite an honor for someone to trust you with truth? Then it's very dishonorable to repeat it. See, if someone loves you enough to trust you with truth, and it better not be a violation of doctrine when they do that. I'm dogmatic that a husband doesn't tell a wife doesn't tell a husband, a mother doesn't share it with a daughter, and a father doesn't share it with a son if it's violation of doctrine. Because you're dealing, even if you love your own flesh and blood with all your heart, would you remember this? You're still dealing with a first-class sinner. Even if you think they're the sweetest and nicest person in the world, they are all what? Sinners with the potential of being what? Deceitful and desperately wicked under certain circumstances. Is that correct? So say it. God requires me to what? Keep the doctrine of confidentiality and privacy according to his covering through the blood. Let's say it out loud. God expects me to keep the doctrine of confidentiality and the doctrine of privacy from everyone. Now, I wonder if you women know that means unless it deals with something that's very serious, you have no right to tell your husband, and the husband has no. You don't even have a right to listen to your husband when he tells you. And I've often wondered what percentage would honor that. I don't know if we could get 5% even in this body on that circumstance right there. It is dead wrong. Let me give you a classic illustration. Jesus Christ, in his humanity, I said in his humanity, I know he was deity, I said in his humanity, didn't even know the hour he was coming back unless he used his deity. You tell me that he isn't trying to set an example of the doctrine of privacy. No man knows the hours. No man knows it but my Father. The angels don't, who have access to the records. Jesus Christ, because in his perfect humanity, the human side of Jesus was kept from knowing the time when he would come back. Until he ended in his glorification. Or he could have used his deity, of course. But that's what he said. No man knows the hour. It's a secret with my Father. Remember I said, so don't misquote me, I said in his humanity, and of course he was deity, so in that sense he knew. But the example was, in his humanity, he did not know, his deity knew. So if he did that, what should you do with the doctrine of privacy? Do you know most of the things you would discuss, that you would discuss privately with somebody close to you? You couples really need, you haven't done anything wrong that I know of, but couples really need to deal with this, and families, fathers and mothers and children, need to deal with this one. All right. Now, and your best friend better not be one that you leak it out to either, because he or she is still a sinner. Okay. Good to see that verse there, but I wanted to hit that one for all winter, all fall. Lest he who hears you revile you, and bring shame upon you, and your ill repute have no end. That's what happens when you violate things and disclose secrets. It causes trouble for people forever. How many understand that? All right. Now, verse 11. A word fitly spoken and in due season is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. This is the speaking of a word in season to him that is weary. And remember, say it with me. The Son had the Father open his ears in the morning and gave him the tongue of what? Say it. That he may know what? How to speak to him who is weary. So, this is a word spoken in season. All right, now, something happens in the ministry that's unexpected. such as it did recently in music here. Now, when that happened, we all had unity that we, unless you were a teenager, that we did not approve, right? 10-1, by the way, it was all right if somebody wrote me a letter. I don't see anything wrong with that. And one did, and I liked it, and I appreciated the girl that did it, and I respect her. And she didn't do wrong by doing it. She had every right to write the letter. But if anyone discussed it in the car or with each other, what would that have been doing to the ministry? Mistrusting the pulpit. Now, the pulpit will deal with that in what? Season. That means privately, alone, with compassion and love, and showing them why we don't want to do it, how it sets us back, how it's a wrong precedent to do that. You understand that? In other words, we don't tear up to the guy and have a meeting when the service is over that night. We wait. We make sure it doesn't happen again, and we creatively correct it properly to salvage the person and not to wound them and not to hurt them, because let's say they had perfect motives but they were just ignorant. Let's say they're pure for where they're at, considering where they're at and what they've been taught. Let's assume that they are very pure and they're doing it out of ignorance and not out of rebellion. Then I go up and say, what did you do that for? That'll never happen again here. Then I get up in the next service, maybe without even going to them. I get up in the next service and say, scream against it. Is that a word in season? No. No, it's not a word in season. Congregational members want you to do that sometimes because it promotes their self-righteousness. It doesn't require wisdom, it doesn't require patience, and it doesn't require letting the pastor handling it and trusting him to do it because he's always handled it properly. You understand what wisdom is? That's wisdom. When something, naturally, occasionally things are going to creep in this pulpit. And when it creeps in this pulpit, I don't like it any more than you do. I didn't know it was going to happen. There was no way I would know it. So I will deal with it afterwards, privately, alone, and in season. Hopefully not to wound the person, but to lovingly compliment them because they have a good heart and make suggestions with their amazing gifts what would profit the body and build them up and arrange for them to do it quickly. How many understand that? See, that's a word spoken what? Sure it is. Sure it is. That's enough for tonight. All right. Let's see, today is Thursday. I believe we assigned you something that was to be in tomorrow night. Was that correct? We will say nothing more. You are dismissed. Father, dismiss us in the name of the Father, Son, and Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen.